Commander Thexnal adjusted his bioluminescent collar insignia for the third time this morning, watching the pristine corridors of Kethvar Military Academy gleam under the artificial twin sun lighting. 27 cycles of service, 43 successful graduating classes, and now this bureaucratic nightmare they called the Deathworlder Integration Program. The Academy's crystalline spires stretched toward the artificial sky dome, each one a testament to Vorthak engineering superiority. For generations, only the galaxy's finest had walked these halls, the noble Zephyrians with their tactical brilliance, the mighty Corvallians with their battle prowess, the intellectual Nexari with their strategic minds, the cream of civilized space, as it should be. But no, the Galactic Council, in their infinite wisdom, had decided that diversity strengthens military effectiveness. Thexnal's mandibles clicked in disgust. Diversity? They were talking about beings from death worlds, primitive backwater planets where survival was apparently more important than civilization. Commander Thexnal, the human contingent arrives in 30-time units, announced his aide, Cadet Zeph Rim, whose nervous chittering betrayed his own concerns about this whole mess. Humans. Of all the species they could have chosen, they picked the bipedal mammals from that third-rate ball of dirt called Earth. Thexnal had read the briefings, of course. Gravity 2.7 times standard, dangerous weather patterns, predators that could apparently kill for sport rather than sustenance. The reports made it sound like some primitive nightmare world where evolution had forgotten to install common sense. 30-time units, Thexnal repeated, his voice carrying that particular Vorthak tone that suggested someone was about to have a very bad day. 30-time units before we start babysitting a bunch of fragile, gravity-dependent mammals who probably need atmospheric masks to breathe properly. The Academy's morning protocols hummed around them, cadets from a dozen species moving in perfect formation, their various appendages synchronized in the universal rhythm of military precision. Soon, that harmony would be disrupted by stumbling bipeds who probably couldn't even maintain formation without tripping over their own feet. Thexnal's optical sensors focused on the intake bay visible through the reinforced viewing portal. Soon, very soon, he would have to pretend that these humans belonged here, among the elite of galactic military training. He would have to treat them as equals, as potential officers worthy of the Academy's proud traditions. What could possibly go wrong with creatures from a world so hostile that their own planet spent most of its time trying to kill them? Surely nothing at all. The transport vessel docked with all the grace of a wounded space whale, which was typical for vessels from the Outer Rim territories. Thexnal positioned himself at the Academy's primary receiving platform, flanked by a formation of senior cadets whose posture screamed military precision. The ceremonial welcome for new species integration was a tradition older than most star systems, though he doubted these humans would appreciate the honor. The airlock hissed open, and out stepped, well, that was disappointing. No hulking brutes, no battle-scarred warriors, no obvious signs of Deathworld conditioning. Just ordinary-looking bipeds with their ridiculously inefficient locomotion systems and those tiny, forward-facing optical sensors they called eyes. Leading the group was a female specimen, designation Maya Torres according to his datapad, average height by human standards, which meant laughably short by galactic norms. Dark hair pulled back in what humans apparently called a ponytail. Because everything they named sounded like primitive animal references. She moved like someone who had never experienced proper gravity in her life. "Look at them," whispered Cadet Vel Thix, a Corvallian whose species prided itself on warrior traditions spanning millennia. "They look so soft. Are you certain they are from a death world?" Zeph Rim's antennae twitched nervously. Perhaps the reports were exaggerated? I mean, how dangerous could their world really be if they evolved to look so harmless? Thexnal's internal assessment was already forming. The Torres female appeared to weigh perhaps half what a standard cadet should. Her limbs were thin, clearly lacking the dense muscle structure necessary for serious combat training. Those hands of theirs, with their ridiculous individual digits, looked like they would snap under the lightest pressure. And those eyes, those tiny, soft eyes that probably couldn't even detect movement in low-light conditions. "Attention, human contingent," Thexnal announced, his voice projecting across the platform with practiced authority. "Welcome to Kethvar Military Academy, where we forge the galaxy's finest military officers through rigorous training protocols designed for advanced civilizations." Maya Torres stepped forward, offering what humans called a salute, another quaint primitive gesture involving hand placement. "Thank you, Commander. We're honored to be here and ready to begin training." "Ready?" Thexnal almost laughed. Tomorrow's combat drill scenario would involve standard Vorthak military exercises, the same ones that had been safely conducted for decades with species possessing proper evolutionary development. Of course, they would need to implement special safety protocols for the humans. Reduced gravity simulation, padded equipment, probably medical teams on standby for when these fragile creatures inevitably injured themselves. "Your first training exercise begins at dawn cycle," he informed them. "Standard combat drill procedures will apply, though naturally we will make appropriate accommodations for your species' particular limitations." Maya Torres nodded politely, though something flickered in those small human eyes that Thexnal couldn't quite identify. Probably fear, he decided. Fear of failing to meet galactic standards. Dawn cycle arrived with the mechanical precision that made Kethvar Academy the envy of civilized space. But the combat training facility hummed to life, its bioluminescent panels casting that familiar blue-white glow across the reinforced sparring mats. Thexnal surveyed his assembled cadets with the satisfaction of someone who had orchestrated this same routine for decades. "Today's exercise follows standard Vorthak Military Protocol 77 Alpha," he announced, his voice echoing off the facility's curved walls. "Close quarters combat assessment, defensive positioning, and tactical response evaluation. Each cadet will be paired with a training partner for regulated sparring procedures." The non-human cadets shifted into their familiar pre-drill stances, mandibles clicking, optical sensors focusing, various appendages flexing in preparation. The humans, naturally, just stood there looking confused and fragile. Among the assembled cadets, one figure stood prominently above the rest. Krextar of the Battleborn clan, whose species had conquered 17 star systems before most civilizations had invented spaceflight. His towering frame cast shadows across 3 lesser cadets, and his ceremonial battle scars gleamed under the facility lighting. Elite bloodline, elite training, elite attitude to match. "Commander Thexnal," Krextar's voice carried the casual arrogance of someone who had never encountered a challenge he couldn't crush. "Surely you don't intend to pair the Deathworlders with actual combat-capable cadets? Perhaps they should observe from a safe distance while proper warriors train." A few nervous chuckles rippled through the assembled group. Thexnal felt his mandibles twitch in what might have been amusement. The young Battleborn had a point, though Academy protocol demanded equal treatment regardless of species capability. "Standard pairing procedures will apply, Cadet Krextar. Random assignment ensures unbiased training opportunities." "Random assignment," Krextar repeated, his forearms flexing in what his species considered polite disagreement. "Of course, Commander. Though I do hope the medical teams are prepared for accidents. These smaller species can be so easily damaged during routine exercises." Maya Torres, standing barely chest-high to most of her fellow cadets, remained silent. Her posture was relaxed, almost casual, which Thexnal found mildly concerning. Shouldn't she be showing proper respect for the obvious physical superiority surrounding her? The girl either had no survival instincts whatsoever, or she was too primitive to understand the danger she was in. "Training pairs will now be assigned," Thexnal announced, consulting his datapad. "Cadet Velthix with Cadet Zorn Dai, Cadet Helvar with Cadet Nix Atel, Cadet Krextar with..." The pause stretched just long enough for every being in the facility to hold their respective breathing apparatus. Random assignment was, of course, completely random. The quantum selection algorithm couldn't possibly have known what it was doing when it paired the galaxy's most arrogant warrior caste cadet with the most fragile-looking Deathworlder in the group. Cadet Krextar, with Cadet Maya Torres. The silence that followed was so complete that Thexnal could hear the facility's life support system cycling. Krextar's mandibles spread in what his species considered a predatory grin. Several cadets took instinctive steps backward, as if proximity to the upcoming disaster might somehow contaminate them. "Excellent," Krextar rumbled, his optical sensors fixed on Maya with the intensity of someone examining an interesting insect. "I shall endeavor to be gentle with our Deathworld guest. Wouldn't want to damage her before she has a chance to experience proper galactic combat techniques." Maya Torres simply nodded, rolling her shoulders in a motion that Thexnal assumed was some sort of primitive warm-up ritual. The poor creature probably had no idea what was about to happen to her. "Pairs will engage in regulated sparring," Thexnal continued, though he was already mentally preparing the incident report. "Standard safety protocols apply. Medical teams are standing by. Begin when ready." What happened next would be analyzed, reanalyzed, and debated in military academies across 17 star systems for the next 3 decades. But in that moment, Thexnal was simply watching what he assumed would be a very brief, very one-sided demonstration of why integration programs were bureaucratic disasters waiting to happen. The other sparring pairs had begun their exercises with the ritualistic precision expected of advanced military training. Careful positioning, measured movements, respectful acknowledgement of opponent capabilities, standard procedure that had worked flawlessly for generations. Krextar, however, apparently decided that standard procedure was beneath him. "Let me show you how real warriors engage," he announced, his voice carrying that particularly grating tone that suggested he was doing everyone a favor by existing. "On my world, we don't waste time with ceremonial posturing." Maya Torres had assumed a basic defensive stance, which to Thexnal's trained eye looked utterly inadequate. Her feet were positioned wrong, her balance seemed off, and those ridiculous human arms were held in a configuration that would have earned failing marks in any first-year combat class. She looked like someone trying to remember instructions from a manual she had only skimmed. Krextar moved with the fluid confidence of someone who had never lost a fight, never doubted his superiority, he never encountered anything that couldn't be solved with superior strength and intimidation. His approach was casual, almost bored, as if he was reaching for a piece of equipment rather than engaging a training partner. "Here, little Deathworlder," he said, extending one of his massive hands toward Maya's arm, "let me demonstrate proper grip techniques for close combat situations." And that, Thexnal realized later, was the exact moment when everything changed. Krextar's hand closed around Maya's upper arm with what he probably considered gentle pressure. To most species, it would have been a controlling grip, firm but not damaging. To a human, apparently it was something else entirely. The transformation was so fast that Thexnal's optical sensors almost missed it. One moment, Maya Torres was standing there looking confused and helpless. The next moment, she was moving with a speed and precision that defied every assumption about Deathworld evolution. Her free hand came up, not in the wild flailing motion Thexnal expected from a panicked primitive, but in a controlled arc that intercepted Krextar's extended arm at precisely the right angle. Her other hand twisted in his grip, not trying to pull away but leveraging the contact point in a way that basic physics suggested should be impossible for someone of her size and apparent strength. There was a sound. Not a crack, not a snap, not even a break. It was more like the sound of a structural support beam giving way under load, a deep, wet, grinding noise that spoke of joints separating in ways that nature had never intended. Krextar's triumphant expression transformed into something that Thexnal had never seen on a battleborn face before. Confusion, pain, and underneath both of those, something that might have been fear. The elite cadet's arm, the same arm that had been reaching out to demonstrate proper grip techniques, was now bent at an angle that violated several fundamental principles of anatomy. His elbow, which moments before had been a perfectly functional joint capable of supporting twice his body weight, was now pointing in a direction that suggested his forearm had decided to explore new career opportunities. That, Maya said in a voice so calm it was almost conversational, is what happens when you grab someone without permission. The silence that followed was so profound that Thexnell could hear his own circulatory system pumping biofluid through his auditory chambers. Every cadet in the facility had frozen mid-motion, their various optical sensors locked on the impossible scene before them. Krextar, the pride of the Battleborn clan, the elite warrior whose ancestors had conquered star systems, was making sounds that his species had no words for. High-pitched, keening noises that suggested his nervous system was processing information it had never been designed to handle. Maya released her grip and stepped back, her posture returning to that same relaxed, almost casual stance she had maintained throughout the entire encounter. As if disabling a warrior twice her size was just another routine training exercise. Medical team to Training Facility Alpha, Thexnell heard himself saying, though his voice sounded like it was coming from someone else's vocal apparatus. Priority 1 medical emergency. Combat injury requiring immediate attention. The medical team arrived within moments, their equipment humming with the efficiency of beings who had dealt with training injuries before. But as they examined Krextar's ruined elbow, their expressions suggested this was not the type of injury they had been prepared for. "Commander, Doctor?" Evlak reported, his usually steady voice carrying an undertone of professional bewilderment. This appears to be a textbook example of hyperextension trauma, but the force required to achieve this level of joint displacement in a Battleborn physiology should have been, well, impossible for a human to generate. Maya Torres stood quietly nearby, waiting for further instructions like any other cadet. The medical bay's emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across Krextar's pain-contorted features as Dr. Hevlak worked with the practiced efficiency of someone who had seen every conceivable training injury, except apparently this one. "The joint separation is complete," he muttered, his 6 hands manipulating diagnostic equipment with frustrated precision. "Ligament damage is extensive, bone displacement is severe, and the muscular trauma suggests impact force equivalent to a small shuttle collision." Thexnell found himself staring at Maya Torres, who sat on a nearby medical bench with the same relaxed posture she had maintained throughout this entire impossible situation. She wasn't gloating, wasn't celebrating, wasn't even showing signs of adrenaline response. She was just waiting. "Cadet Torres," he began, then stopped. How exactly did one ask a being who had just shattered every assumption about their species to explain themselves? "Perhaps you could enlighten us about what precisely occurred during the training exercise?" Maya tilted her head slightly, a gesture that Thexnell was beginning to realize might indicate thoughtful consideration rather than confusion. He grabbed my arm without warning during what I understood to be a controlled sparring exercise. I responded according to standard defensive protocols. "Standard defensive protocols," Dr. Hevlak repeated, his optical sensors never leaving the diagnostic readings. "For your species, these protocols apparently include generating enough force to disable a Battleborn warrior in under 2 seconds. "Well," Maya said with what humans apparently called a shrug, "yes. That's kind of the point of defensive training." The other cadets had gathered in the medical bay's observation area, their various breathing apparatus working overtime as they processed what they had witnessed. Velthix was making soft, clicking sounds that indicated severe anxiety in his species. Zephrim's antennae were twitching so rapidly they were creating small air currents. "I don't understand," Cadet Nixatel whispered, her voice barely registering on the facility's audio sensors. "How did something so small generate so much force?" Maya's expression shifted to what Thexnell was learning to recognize as patient explanation mode. "Earth has gravity approximately 2.7 times galactic standard. Our atmospheric pressure is higher, our weather systems are more violent, and our ecosystem includes approximately 47,000 species that can kill us if we're not careful. She paused, apparently organizing her thoughts in a way that suggested she had given this explanation before. Humans evolved as persistence hunters on a world where everything from the weather to the wildlife to the terrain itself was actively trying to end our existence. Our reflexes aren't just trained responses, they're evolutionary imperatives. When something grabs us unexpectedly, our nervous system doesn't pause to evaluate threat levels or consider diplomatic solutions. Dr. Hevlak looked up from his patient, his expression suggesting he was recalculating everything he thought he knew about Deathworld evolution. "You're saying this response was automatic?" "Completely automatic," Maya confirmed. "I didn't decide to disable Cadet Krextar. My nervous system detected a potential threat, analyzed the optimal response trajectory, and executed appropriate defensive measures before my conscious mind finished processing what was happening." The silence that followed this explanation was different from the stunned quiet after the incident. This was the silence of beings whose fundamental understanding of reality was being systematically dismantled and reconstructed. The Force generation, Thex now found himself asking, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer, how is it possible for your muscle structure to produce such results? Maya's expression brightened, as if this was her favorite part of the explanation. Dense bone structure from high-gravity evolution, muscle fiber density approximately 3 times galactic average, and reflexive targeting systems that have been refined by millions of years of avoiding death on a daily basis. She gestured toward the still-groaning Krextar. His species evolved on a world where strength and intimidation were sufficient for survival. My species evolved on a world where speed, precision, and overwhelming response to threats were the only things that kept us from being eaten by our own planet. Cadet Velthix made a sound that his species used to indicate existential terror. "Are you saying that all humans possess these capabilities?" "All humans who survive to adulthood," Maya replied matter-of-factly. "The ones who don't develop proper reflexes tend to get removed from the gene pool fairly early. Natural selection is quite efficient on Earth." Thex now felt his worldview rearranging itself around this new information. The fragile Deathworlders weren't weak beings who had somehow survived despite their limitations. They were apex predators who had been shaped by environmental pressures that would have sterilized most worlds. "The integration program," he said slowly, "assumes that different species will adapt to Academy standards through training and conditioning." "Oh, we're very adaptable," Maya agreed cheerfully. "We've spent most of our evolutionary history adapting to things that wanted to kill us. A military academy should be quite manageable by comparison." Dr. Hevlak finished his preliminary assessment and approached the group, his expression suggesting someone who had discovered that physics worked differently than he had assumed. "Cadet Krextar will require surgical reconstruction and approximately 6 healing cycles for full recovery. The precision of the joint damage suggests, well, it suggests someone who knew exactly how to disable a battleborn with minimal effort." "Basic anatomy study," Maya explained. "All humanoid species share similar joint vulnerabilities. It's just a matter of applying the right pressure at the right angle." The other cadets exchanged glances that seemed to carry entire conversations about revised threat assessments and survival strategies. 3 cycles later, Kethvar Military Academy had implemented what administrators diplomatically termed enhanced safety protocols for Deathworld species integration. What this actually meant, Thexnell discovered, was that every aspect of standard training had to be reconsidered when one of your cadets could accidentally cripple someone while demonstrating a handshake. New Regulation 47 Alpha, announced Academy Director Quinn Thala during the morning briefing, her usually steady voice carrying undertones of barely controlled panic. "All physical contact training exercises involving human cadets must be preceded by explicit consent protocols and supervised by medical teams equipped with rapid response trauma equipment." Thexnell reviewed his modified lesson plans with something approaching professional fascination. Combat training now included mandatory lectures on human anatomy and appropriate restraint techniques. Sparring exercises had been redesigned around the assumption that human defensive responses operated at approximately the same level as emergency weapons systems. Maya Torres, meanwhile, had become something of a phenomenon. Her academic performance was exemplary, her tactical assessments showed remarkable creativity, and her ability to think outside conventional military parameters was proving invaluable in strategic planning exercises. The fact that she could also disable most of her classmates without conscious effort was simply an additional consideration for training protocols. Commander Thexnell, she approached him after a particularly successful tactical simulation. I wanted to apologize again for the incident with Cadet Krextar. I should have warned everyone about human defensive reflexes before we began physical training. Thexnell's mandibles clicked in what he was learning to recognize as ironic amusement. Cadet Torres, your reflexes have provided the Academy with more valuable data about Deathworld evolution than 3 decades of theoretical xenobiology courses. Krextar's injury was educational. The other human cadets were proving equally enlightening. Cadet Jake Martinez had accidentally bent a training weapon during what he considered a gentle grip adjustment. Cadet Lisa Park had somehow completed an obstacle course designed for zero-gravity species while operating under standard atmospheric conditions, leading to extensive recalculations of course difficulty ratings. The humans appear to consider these capabilities entirely normal, Dr. Hevlak reported during weekly medical assessments. When I asked Cadet Martinez about his grip strength, he seemed genuinely confused by the question. Apparently, opening containers that require significant force application is considered a routine daily activity on Earth. What fascinated Thexnell most was how the humans had integrated into Academy social structures. Despite their terrifying physical capabilities, they remained remarkably pleasant company. Maya Torres had started what she called a study group that somehow managed to improve academic performance across multiple species. Her teaching methods involved something called patience and encouragement, concepts that most military institutions considered counterproductive. The other cadets' initial terror had evolved into cautious respect, then genuine admiration. Thexnell now sought Maya's input on combat strategy assignments. Zeph Rim had started asking questions about Earth ecology with the fascination of someone studying a particularly creative form of systematic torture. I find myself revising my assessment of the integration program, Thexnell admitted to his aide, though perhaps for reasons the Galactic Council never anticipated. The humans are proving surprisingly effective Academy additions, Zeph Rim agreed, though I suspect surprising may be insufficient terminology. Maya Torres walked past at that moment, carrying what appeared to be several other cadets' equipment loads while maintaining casual conversation about atmospheric pressure differentials. She nodded politely to Thexnell, her expression carrying that same unreadable quality he had noticed on her first day. Indeed, Thexnell murmured, watching her disappear around a corridor corner. Insufficient terminology for beings who consider surviving on a death world to be routine preparation for military academy. 6 cycles after the incident that would forever be known in Academy records as the Krextar adjustment, Thexnell found himself reviewing recruitment statistics with something approaching professional pride. Applications from human candidates had increased by 400%, but though he suspected this was less about Academy reputation and more about word spreading through Deathworld communities that civilized space might finally be ready for their particular brand of routine survival skills. Krextar had returned to training with a rebuilt elbow and a substantially revised attitude toward species classification. He now served as Maya Torres' voluntary sparring partner, which spoke volumes about either his intellectual growth or his species' capacity for masochistic education. Possibly both. The Galactic Council had requested detailed reports on human integration success, though Thexnell suspected they were really asking whether their diversity initiative had accidentally introduced a species of casual weapons systems into military training programs. His reports were diplomatic masterpieces of understatement, carefully avoiding phrases like accidental dismemberment protocols and reflexive threat neutralization capabilities. Commander Zeph Rim interrupted his reflections. The morning briefings include updates on human cadet performance metrics. Shall I summarize? Please do, Thexnell replied, though he was fairly certain he knew what the reports would contain. Outstanding academic achievement across all metrics, exceptional tactical creativity, remarkable team leadership capabilities, and zero training injuries among human cadets. However, training injuries among non-human cadets interacting with human cadets have decreased by 93%, apparently due to improved awareness of personal space boundaries and explicit consent protocols. Thexnell's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. The Academy's prestigious reputation remained intact, their training programs had achieved new levels of effectiveness, and the galaxy was slowly learning that fragile was perhaps not the most accurate descriptor for beings whose planet had spent millions of years conducting comprehensive stress testing on their evolutionary development. Some days, bureaucratic disasters worked out better than anyone had the right to expect.